We are in Judges 15. We are in Judges 15. We're ready for verse 7. We're talking about Samson. Maybe we can finish Samson tonight because there's more of story than application, although we will make some application. We know the story of Samson. We know it begins in Judges, the 13th chapter, where the angel of the Lord, first of all, comes Manoah. Manoah is the father of Samson. Also, basically what he and his wife are told is that Samson was to follow a Nazirite vow. And we've talked about that, how that it's not to touch anything that is with blood, that he is to basically have a strict diet, a certain diet, that also that he was not to cut his hair. And his Nazirite vow was different than most folk, because most Nazirites' vow was a vow of consecration, which really only lasted a week. And Samson's was to last all of his life. Now, he's going to violate it several different times, and we've already noted some of those things. But nevertheless, Manoah has this wonderful, I think, verse in which he asked the angel of the Lord, he says, teach us what to do with this child. Teach us how to raise this child. Then you get into the 14th chapter, and you see Samson. Samson now is born, and Samson is grown. And unfortunately, what you find out about Samson is Samson's not a godly man. Samson finds women that are the Philistines instead of the Israelites. He just doesn't listen. He doesn't listen to his parents. He doesn't listen to God. It's also in the 14th chapter, remember, where he kills a lion and then he comes back and there are bees in there and there's honey in there, which provides then a riddle that we talked about not last week, but week before last, as we talked about the riddle and how they answered it and how basically Samson missed out on a wife, if you will, at that point in time. We get we saw the rest of the things in the 14th chapter. We get to the 15th chapter then, and we see where Samson goes and when he goes to see his wife, he doesn't have a wife. And so he takes 300 foxes, he ties their tails together, pretty much takes care of the community because of the fire that he starts because of them. And then we get into further Samson's revenge. Beginning of verse 7, Samson said to them, since you do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease. So he promises in many ways, this is my last battle. Interesting thought. It's not exactly correct, but nevertheless, no more revenge, no more. So what did he do? So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. Then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. Now, Edom, the rock, it says, the cleft of the rock, a cave at Edom. Edom was known to be a place for birds of prey to exist. And so he's in these caves with these birds of prey, living with them because time passes. Now he is about, best we can tell, he's about 15 miles, what we know of Edom. Edom was 15 miles east of Samson's hometown of Timnah. And so he is not what we would call anywhere close to home. He's really, as they would look at it, he's almost a day's journey from home, dwelling in the clefts of the rock. Now the Philistines went up, encamped in Judah. Notice they went up. Bible's geographically correct, if nothing else. Of course, it's more than that. But anyway, it's geographically correct. Philistines went up, encamped in Judah, deployed themselves against Leah. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? So they answered, we've come up to arrest Samson, to do to him as he's done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah. This is a very large posse if you stop and think about it. 3,000 men against one, but 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I've done to them. An eye for an eye, revenge. I was reading something today has nothing to do with Samson. It was an interesting thought. It's actually in Brother Eddie Clore's commentary. Is the truth for today has a series of commentaries. If you're interested in commentaries written by members of the church, Truth for Today is the newest one that's out, and it's not complete yet. It is expensive, I will tell you. I don't know how many volumes are in. It's both the Old and New Testament. I have several of them, but they run. You can find them sometimes at a discount, but they run about $29.95 a volume, and so it's kind of expensive. And Brother Clore he actually has 4 volumes on Psalms. He has not finished the 4th one yet. He has 3 that are out, and so they go basically. The first 3 go from Psalm 1 to Psalm 118. And in his first volume, I was reading on Psalm 30. I think I was in Psalm 36 at the time, and he was talking about the imprecatory prayers. And the imprecatory prayers in the book of Psalms, and I'm deviating a little bit, but I'm gonna bring it full circle. The imprecatory prayers in Psalms are what theologians call imprecatory. The word just means curse. And if you read Psalms, sometimes you find the psalmist rendering a curse or asking God really to get, curse my enemies, do this to my enemies, destroy my enemies. And anyway, Brother Clore, in discussing imprecatory prayers, and not much, I think he does in a later volume, but where I was today, where I was reading, talked about how that revenge in the Old Testament, see, I told you I was going to get it back to it. Revenge in the Old Testament was something that God allowed and was allowed for in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, because God was trying to get his people, Israel, to a point to ultimately get us then to the New Testament and the early church and the salvation of mankind, where, according to the New Covenant, of course, and Brother Clore's right, according to the New Covenant, revenge is out of the question by all means. But nevertheless, the Old Testament allowed at times for revenge. Now, remember, Samson's not a godly man. Number 2, remember that Samson's example here is not a positive example of something to do. It's an example of what he did, but it's not an example for what we are to do. But he's out to seek revenge. He says, I'm going to do to them what they've done to me. But they said to him, we've come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. Then Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. Now, I don't know if you thought about this, probably you have, but think about this. Samson makes his own people take an oath that they will not kill him. I don't know what this says about anybody, to be honest. I don't know if this says that Samson is a person that just doesn't trust people, if it says that Samson was so vile that even his own people wanted to kill him and he knew it, or whether it was just the fact that he felt like he had more work to do. I don't know. I don't think any of us know. The text really doesn't say. It's just interesting that he says, swear to me, take an oath that you'll not kill me. And so they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand. But we shall surely not kill you. And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. His own countrymen take him, bind him, new ropes. New ropes is interesting, especially when we get into the next chapter. There are things that we know and things that we don't know. There are things that by inspiration the writer did include, and there are things that he did not include. There are things that God didn't reveal, and there are things that God did reveal. And the things that God didn't reveal sometimes aggravate us, especially when you get to, like, as we'll see in just a minute, the 16th chapter. And so there are things we know and there are things that we don't know. The idea of new ropes, though, would be, of course, ropes that were not tested, but yet at the same time, too, were probably at the strongest point that they would ever be. And of course, we know he has great power. He came to Leah. The Philistines came shouting against him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand, took it, killed 1,000 men with it. Now, once again, he breaks his Nazirite vow, finds a fresh jawbone of a donkey or of an ass, if you will, and kills these individuals, breaking, of course, his the Nazirite vow that he was supposed to be keeping, but which seemingly to him meant nothing. And then he gives a victory celebration or a celebration song. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Look at that for a minute. Who does he claim won the victory? He did. What do you not see in his celebration? Yeah, there's no thanking of God. There's no mention of God, no thanking of God. It's him. It's himself. You wonder if Samson was a narcissist. Now, a narcissist, you see them on TV. A narcissist is somebody that they'll gaslight you. They'll play you like a card, like a game almost. But it's all circled around them. They'll tell you a tale. They want to be the life of the party. They want to be the one seen. But they will lead you, misguide you, and pull you in. I had a man, not this congregation, but another congregation that I worked with, that he was a narcissist and full blown. And it was interesting and sad. And I had to talk to him on a couple of occasions to get him to understand, because he was one of my elders, sadly. But I had to get him to understand that I wasn't his elder or his preacher. I was everybody's preacher. He was one of my elders, but he wasn't my elder. He was one of my elders. And I was preacher for everybody. And he had folks that he didn't like, sadly. And when you helped those individuals, you were then, as he would tell you, he would say, you're against me. That's sort of the mindset of a narcissist. And I wonder if Samson wasn't like that. Samson, just everything was about him. And so it was, verse 17, when he had finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hand, and he called the place Ramath Leah, which just simply means jawbone height. Then he became very thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord and said, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. And notice his prayer. He calls upon God, but notice who he says the victory came from the hand of your servant. And now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. How thirsty was he? Was he that thirsty? Was he that famished from fighting? Or was it just the fact that he was just thirsty and he was using all this sort of as a smokescreen? Who knows? So God split the hollow place that was in Leah, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. So the idea is, the Hebrew word is, he came back to life. So maybe he was truly thirsty, but we're not sure. Therefore, he called its name En Hakor, which literally means spring of the collar, which is in Leah to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Sad thing is, he didn't run them out. He just sort of lived with them. Matter of fact, he chose Philistine women over Israelites. And needless to say, really led to his demise or his downfall. Anything about that chapter you want to talk about? Yeah, good point. Yes, very much so. Very much. I see today in 15 and 16. I really do. Yeah. Yeah. By the way, Jay, do you have the NIV with you? Will you read verse 16? Will you read his victory song in the NIV? Yeah. Yeah. I read that somewhere that that's what the NIV said. I thought that's interesting. sometimes, sometimes. Um, some lessons we might learn. I've got 5 lessons from this chapter. First of all, don't sin in your anger. The destructive nature of revenge when he killed all the people, when he tied the fox's tails together, sent fire through basically the community. Revenge doesn't accomplish anything. It didn't in that case. Uh, so don't sin in your anger. Secondly, verse 2, especially if you go back to verse 2, where he said, he thought that the woman was his wife, and he's mistaken. Father says, "Oh, I've already given her to somebody else." And that, I think, a good lesson is the need to communicate. Don't assume certain things. Don't assume certain facts. Don't assume that we know everything, because we don't. We don't know everything on any subject. Now, some folks are highly educated and they're well trained in certain areas, but there's always something to be learned. The idea of communication helps in that. Thirdly, accept responsibility for your actions, which Samson did when it was a victory, but didn't when it was when things were rough. Verse 19, I think we learn that God will strengthen us when we need strengthening. God will strengthen us, and revenge is ugly, of course. We've already somewhat hit upon that. Anything else before we move into the 16th chapter? Okay, so Samson goes to Gaza. Gaza is about 45 miles from Samson's hometown. And there he saw a harlot, and he went into her. And when the Gazites were told Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. Now think about this. Samson has not made any friends. He's made a lot of enemies, but no friends. The Gazites, okay, we're going to take him. So they were quiet all night, sitting around the gate of the city. They were waiting on him. And in the morning, when it was daylight, their plan was to kill him, capture him when he came out, and kill him. Samson laid low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Now think about this. Gates, the city, were thick, heavy. Now we know Samson was great strength. Samson carries this gate, these posts that no telling how much the way really don't know, but he carries them uphill 38 miles. Uphill 38 miles. I haven't been able to do it in the last 3 or 4 weeks, but in the evenings I would leave the house, come out here to Sawyer Brown and go up here to Oak Haven, Trace, walk all the way up that hill, all the way back down, and then hit Sawyer Brown to the highway, and then turn around and just come back, straight back. It's a little over 2 miles, two and a half, I think. I measured it round trip. But sometime go up Oak Haven, and literally I had to build up to it. But go up Oak Haven and see how straight up it is. Now think about doing that for 38 miles. And think about doing it for 38 miles with basically the city gates on your shoulders. Shows his strength. It shows his power physically. And so he's a man of great strength. And this will come into play here in just a second. But afterward, it happened that he, Samson, loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, it's interesting because Delilah means worshiper or devotee. We'll just call her worshiper. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice, lure. The Hebrew word also has the idea of promise. Lure, promise, entice him, and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him, afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, think about this. This equates, if you do a little math, this equates to about 5,500 shekels. Now, you say, well, okay, how much is that? The average salary was 10 shekels per year. You're talking about a lot of money that they've promised her. A whole lot of money. Her family is set for years to come. The promise. And so, Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and with what you may be bound to afflict you. She sells him out. She's sold out. She was more interested really in the money than she was in Samson. Now, from here on in this chapter, like I said a while ago, we're going to get things with regards to known and unknown. There are things that are just baffle you, right? Because why is it Samson doesn't figure out that Delilah keeps asking him, what can I do? Where's your strength? And when he says, well, if I don't have this, or if this happens, or that happens, or this is done, then I won't have any strength anymore. And she turns right around and does it. And yet he keeps telling her till he finally, as we know the story, he tells her the absolute truth. I know the story. You know the story. But the unknown is, why did he keep doing that? Don't know. Why did she really do it? Was it for the money? Was it for the fact that she was more nationalistic and she really was more for her nation than she was for Israel? Was it the fact that she was an individual that was protecting something or someone? Was it due to the fact that she was scared of? I don't know. Don't know. But I do know this, that she sold him out. It's exactly right. There's another one of those. Yeah, it's a good one. It could have been. It could have been. Yeah, could have been. I mean, that's a great possibility, but don't know that, but it's a great possibility. So like I say, there's the known, the unknown in these verses, but all true, all good. Well, Samson said to her in verse 7, they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings. Now we're not talking about bowstrings as we think of bowstrings. We think of bowstrings, they're not that thick. But the strings here are tent cords. And so he says, bind me with 7 tent cords. Now you and I, we all know you find a tent cord, you found thick rope. And so he says, bind me with 7 fresh ones. Fresh ones, why? Because they're at the peak of their strength. They're not worn. They're not brittle because of age. They're not worn from use. They're brand new. And he said, not yet dried. Then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were laying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. We know how easy that is. So just imagine the strength there. So the secret of his strength was not known. Number 2, Delilah says to Samson, "Look, you've mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with." Now, all of a sudden the waterworks starts. And not only do the waterworks start, but probably the batting of the eyelashes start. And the tone starts. You've lied to me. You haven't told me the truth. You've mocked me. Please tell me. So, verse 11, he said to her, "If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man, much like the first time. But just bind me with new ropes." Therefore, Delilah took new ropes, bound him with them, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like thread. Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." So here we go, third time. Like I say, waterworks started. She's got a tone and a tune probably to her. She's batting the eyelashes as well. She's trying to find out and figure out. She's sold him out. Why he doesn't stop it, who knows? We don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense logically to me. I mean, from a standpoint. My wife, by the way, and I'm going to use this as an illustration later. You know what my wife called me last week as we were riding in the car? You know, when you ride in the car with your wife, it's a dangerous thing. And I was right, Kent? Don't answer that. But I was riding with her. I was driving, and she was into her phone, which she always is. She's addicted to that thing. And anyway, we were talking, and she called me. You know what she called me? She called me. I'm not going to tell you what she called me. It wasn't nice. It was Christian, but it wasn't nice. And we'll save that for an illustration. But nevertheless, we get to talking sometimes. Well, she's talking. And so here comes the third lie, if you will. He said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." Now, I didn't find a real good explanation for this, although Brother Dale Mannard, he probably came to Harding after you were at Harding. Yeah. His father, I don't think his father is still alive, but his father actually preached for a while at 5 Points, which is in Hickman County, if you're familiar with Hickman County. Dale is, I think he's retired. He may be retired now. But Dale taught at Harding University. Dale was also an archaeologist, very good and very knowledgeable. Dale likened this unto some big web with giant posts that were driven into the ground, and somehow his hair was then weaved into these giant posts. And to be honest, even that explanation I didn't follow because, and he even made the statement, he says, no one really knows what this loom looked like or what it was. But it says that weave my 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom. And so she did, verse 14. She wove it tightly with the batten of the loom, the pin of the loom, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he woke from his sleep, pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me?" So here comes number 4. You've mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. Don't you like listening to arguments? Because a lot of times when you listen to arguments, there's always great holes in arguments and there's great fallacies in those arguments, right? Look at the one right here. Look at verse 15. How can you say, "I love you," when your heart is not with me? How can you say you love me when you're not committed to me? Do what? You're trying to kill him? Can't believe it. But that's what she said. And so it came to pass, verse 16, that when she pestered him daily, so this was a constant thing, and now she's gone from waterworks and batting of eyes to nagging him. Boy, she is a piece of work if there ever was one. I mean, she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. Have you ever gotten to the point, Jim, it was one of your talks. Oh, it was your Sunday morning lesson on being frustrated. I thought about that when I was studying this morning. We all get frustrated. Graceland, I know that all of y'all's grandchildren never had terrible twos. Well, Graceland is fixing to be 3 in December, and Graceland has just now hit her terrible twos. And Suzanne will not admit it, but she'll say quietly she will. But Graceland has hit them, and so she's trying to figure out where she fits in, where she starts and they end, and where they start and she ends, and she'll figure it out. But I watched my son, who is very calm. My son is very calm, and I watched him Sunday night. We were planning on being back here, but we got caught up there, and they had church at 5, so we just stayed and went to church. And then Ethan said, "Hey, let's grab a bite as you go out of town." Okay. And I watched Ethan get fed up. It's kind of interesting because I've been that way for 18 years of his life. And so to see him, he had just had enough because he ordered her one thing, he got another, and she decided she wanted what he had. And it was just more than he could take. So you get fed up. You get frustrated, you get fed up. Well, that's really what's happened to Samson. He's so vexed to death. And he told her all of his heart, and he said to her, "No razor has ever come upon my head." Now I wonder why she hadn't figured this out. That's one of those unknown known things, but she hadn't figured it out. But he says, "No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." One of the things that some commentators question is, at what point did Samson really know? And there's no way to answer this, at least from the text. At what point did Samson know where his strength really laid? Now, I don't know. I don't know the answer, and that's one of those unknown things. But it's evident here that he definitely knows where it came from. When Delilah, verse 18, saw that he had told her all of his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." She now knows his secret. He's told me all of his heart. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Now, once again, known, unknown, how in the world do you sleep through that? Of course, some of us might say, "Hey, I can go to sleep when they're cutting my hair." And so that's why Jackie talks to me, I think. I'm in the gym, so I won't go to sleep. So he slept through this. How? I don't know. But nevertheless, he's asleep. They shave off the 7 locks of his head. She began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. So he really thought, it's as it has always been. Then the Philistines took him, put out his eyes. The word "put out" has the idea of pierce. Now, how they did this, unknown. Did they drive stakes in his eyes? Did they take some sort of pins and push them in his eye? Don't know. But they pierced. The word "put out" is the idea of pierce. So they took him, they pierced his eyes. Thirdly, they brought him down to Gaza. Fourthly, they bound him with bronze fetters. Bronze would have been the strongest metal, it said, at that time. He became a grinder. The fifth thing, became a grinder of the grain, which was a humiliating task, because this was what the women did. This was their job. And so they not only, if you will, humbled him, but they humiliated him and they disabled him. However, verse 22, we see a glimmer of hope. We see the grace of God and the mercy of God. The hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. While he doesn't have strength, he doesn't have sight, he doesn't have freedom, he doesn't have dignity, his hair begins to grow back. And so there's a glimmer of hope for Israel, and there's a glimmer of hope for even Samson. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. Dagon was little g, god of fertility crop, or crops, the fertility of the crops. In other words, bountiful harvest. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and one who multiplied our dead. So it happened that when their hearts were merry, they said, call for Samson that he may perform for us. So they're going to taunt him. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. Then Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, and notice once again, they are taunting him, they are humiliating him, to have this big, strong man all of a sudden now being led by a small child was an act of contempt, really. But nevertheless, Samson asked this lad, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so that I can lean on them. The word lean, the Hebrew word lean there is interesting. It's the idea that I can support myself on them. That's really what he says. He says, let me put my hands on the posts, the gates, so that I can, or the pillars, so that I can support myself. Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof watching while Samson performed. Samson called to the Lord. This is his prayer. It's kind of interesting because in all of this is all that we have, mind you, the second time that he's called upon the Lord. But nevertheless, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. So he calls upon God, remember who I am, take note of me, strengthen me, which we know God can do and God will do. Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 3 that we're strengthened with might by his spirit in the inner man, Ephesians 3:16. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my two eyes. So once again, revenge. Once again, this theme keeps coming back and is part of Samson's life. Samson took hold of the two middle pillars which supported the temple, braced himself against them, one on his right hand and the other on his left. Probably some have said that he pushed them out. So he's in between the columns and he's able to, or the post, and he's able to push them out. And when he does, verse 30 says, Samson, as he once again calls on God, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all of his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. And his brothers and his father's household came down, took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, which would be in a valley in between home place and the next town over, in the tomb of his father Manoah. Somewhere in this story, we're not told, but his father Manoah evidently has died. Somewhere in that 20 years of judging, Manoah has passed away. And so Samson is carried to the same, if you will, cemetery burial plot where his father is buried and he is buried. And he judged Israel for 20 years. It's a great story. I want I want you to see something. I'm working on a lesson that I'm going to preach first of next year, sometime next year. I want us to look at the Bible, and I want us to see that the story of Samson is but a little picture inside a big picture, inside a bigger picture, which is inside of a bigger picture. The little story is his life. That's his story. But when you stop and think about it, it's part of a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that, and I'm just going to go through, I'm not going to go through all the pictures. I'm just going to try to give you the wide view. The Old Testament is really all about showing us God, revealing to us God. That's really the whole Bible, the revelation of God, revelation of himself to mankind. But the deliverance of Israel, his people, how he treated them, even though they didn't always treat him the way they should, carrying us up to a time of salvation. Like I say, it's really a picture inside of a picture, inside of a picture, inside of a picture. And this picture is of God's tolerance by allowing Samson to be the man that he was, not agreeing with him, not saying that he was a righteous man. We're not saying that. And not saying that God said, oh, this is my wonderful servant. But God allowing this man to show us that God was with his people, protecting Israel by the use of a strong man by the name of Samson, who was a judge. But also the picture is that of the idea of God delivering his children. What happens next in chapter 17 through 21 as we finish out this book is really a sad tale of Israel. What's going to happen is there's going to be a statement fairly early on, 17th chapter. It's going to make this statement that everyone did what he pleased. No one listened. No one listened to God. And so that's the bigger picture of Israel so oftentimes. And so we will close out this book looking at 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21, but knowing that Israel is just falling apart in many ways. What are some lessons we might learn? Well, one of them I wrote down was, how long does it take before you learn your lesson? Samson, 4 times. Finally, the nagging got to him, I guess. We don't need to forsake God. Samson really never was on God's team. If you really look at it, he never really was a follower of God. He never listened to what God's law said. He never really honored the Nazirite vow. He was all enamored, if you will. That's the best word I could think of. He's all enamored with Philistine women instead of with the Israelites. But there's a great lesson there. Don't need to forsake God. Thirdly, some secrets need to be left as secrets. There are secrets that need to be left as secrets. Samson should have left his secret as a secret. Failures can bring us back to God. I think Samson's failure ultimately brought him to God. He may not have even been a follower when he prayed, but he prayed to God. And physical strength, of course, is not enough. You need something between the ears, not just in the pecs, if you will. Anything else? Well, the natives back there are restless. I hear them. Let's bow forward to prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day, for the many blessings, thankful for your love and the way you watch over us and care for us. We ask that you be with our congregation. We're so thankful for River Road, for its past, and we ask that you be with us now in the present and help us as we look towards the future. We ask that you be with those that were mentioned in our announcements that are not doing well. We ask that you be with those that have had surgery, that you bless them with speedy recovery, and those that are going through procedures, that they'll have great success in those procedures. We ask that you Watch over us now as we go throughout the rest of this week, that you'll bless us and keep us and hold us within the hollow of your hand as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Look forward to seeing you Sunday. As we see you Sunday, just a minute. As we see you Sunday for Fifth Sunday, and bring plenty of food. And we're going to talk Sunday morning on God Still Works. We hope you'll be here for that. See ya.